and welcome. I'm Aditya, and I'm here on behalf of the Personal Growth Washington Group, and also in partnership with Optimize Your Life. That's OYL. You can find them at go/OYL. And we are proud to bring to you today Dr. Temple Grandin, who I believe most of you probably are already familiar with. So she's professor of animal studies at Colorado State University and a world-renowned expert in animal welfare, particularly in the agriculture industry and on autism advocacy. So we're really happy to have her today, and thanks for joining us. And with that, I'll present Dr. Grandin.
Well, it's really good to be here today, and let's just start talking a little bit about what autism is. Autism is a developmental disorder, and it varies from very severe, where there's no speech, to very, very mild, where it just merges into a personality variant. And when you get into the very mild, you will have Steve Jobs, and you will have Einstein. He had no speech until age 3. You'll have Tesla, who invented the electric power plant. So at one end of the spectrum, it's probably just a personality variant. Other end of the spectrum, a very, very severe handicap. And if you were to get rid of all of the genetics that makes autism, well, probably anywhere from 25 to 50% of the people that work here, you're not going to get any new employees. It's going to be just that simple. And there's many other people in Silicon Valley that I know are on the spectrum, big names, but I won't mention them by name because they're still living. And all of the information I've gotten on Steve Jobs has come from publicly available sources like the book, Business Week magazine, and other sources. And he was a kid who had a lot of problems in school. He was teased, and he had to switch to another school. He was very lucky to go into a Cupertino Valley high school where there was lots of other tech people and people doing interesting things in their garage. And he got into a computer club. You know, we got to look at how do we get some of these kids that are kind of floundering around into really good things. Well, it's through shared interests. You know, the way Steve Jobs got into the industry was getting into a computer club. Other people with similar like interests. And the genetics of autism is real complicated. It's a whole lot of little tiny small gene variations. And as you have people get married and have kids, and the more you concentrate the traits, the more likely you are to get autism. In its mild form, it can give you an advantage. And its very severe form, a lot of problems. And one of the big problems that educators have is a lot of special educators. They're well trained to work with the more severe kids, but they don't know what to do with the smart math geek kids. The lucky ones, they'll get off into advanced placement. The unlucky ones, they'll make them drill them over and over and over again on the same stuff, and they're going to get really bored and going to hate school, and that's not going to be a good thing. You know, around here, I know that a lot of the companies around here reach out to the high schools. But then I go out to the Midwest, and I see smart kids that ought to be working here, and they're going absolutely nowhere. They're getting addicted to video games, and they're ending up on Social Security in the basement playing video games. And if they were getting programming jobs, designing video games, that'd be one thing, but that's where a lot of them just simply aren't going there. Now, I want you to think about different ways of thinking. You know, a lot of people here, you're mathematical thinkers, and I am an extreme visual thinker. And I want to talk about how different kinds of minds can work together on projects. There are different ways of thinking. I've done a lot of work with animals, and being an extreme visual thinker helped me, because to understand an animal, you got to totally get away from verbal language. It's a world of pictures, a world of sound, a world of little detailed sensory sensations. It's not abstract. Now, when Van Gogh painted Starry Night, I don't think he realized that he was painting mathematics into Starry Night. You see, underneath language, there's all the fun stuff, mathematics, art, things like that. And some statisticians got a hold of this and found mathematics in it. There's also a type of Alzheimer's where, as the person's frontal cortex and language parts of the brain get wrecked, visual thinking comes out. And this painting was done by somebody with Alzheimer's, and then eventually the whole brain is trashed. And then you've got thinking in details. You see, the kind of thinking that I have is bottom up. I form concepts by putting specific pictures into file folders in my brain. You know, everything is learned by specific example rather than having a big overriding theory. So this is a kind of a classic Gestalt test. And a person on the spectrum, they can identify the little letters a lot faster than the big letters. Now, there's some fascinating research that shows that the normal brain drops out details. Well, we know in programming, details are really important. Things are not going to work. So if you take somebody on the autism spectrum and you put them in a scanner and you have them read out of a book, the scanner gets all turned on in the part of the brain where the words are processed. You take the Asperger, which is just milder autism, and put them in there, and you get the syntax, the whole, and the detail of the words. But then you take the normal person, guess what happens? You lose all the detail of the words. And I think one of the big problems we have today in trying to work on policy and a lot of things is you got policymakers now that have totally gotten separated from the ground, from the real things out there on the ground, out there in the physical world. The physical world is where I work. I don't understand what you do in programming, but I understand things like you've got a big valve and there's a solenoid to turn that valve. Is that valve going to work, or is it stuck because it's been sitting there for 5 years and it's never been turned? That's the kind of stuff I understand. And I was asked in the previous section if there's any things that I'm concerned about, you know, where we could have like major screw-ups. I can tell you right now, power grid security, that's one of them. And the other big one is somebody wants to make an all-electronic car with electronic brakes. I'm not very big on that. I think there's certain things that better work maybe my old-fashioned way. Brakes that work no matter what. Steering, where I can still steer, and I can turn the whole thing off if I absolutely have to. I'm sure everybody heard about how the Israeli intelligence agency hacked into the Iran nuclear centrifuges and made them run really fast, so they destroyed themselves. And that was run off a standard industrial controller. Well, how can I avoid to have that not happen to a power plant and spin a power plant too fast and break it? Well, how about an old-fashioned 50s style control? Goes too fast, it shuts down. It gets too hot, it shuts down. In other words, some controls where a computer has absolutely nothing to do with it to make sure that something bad doesn't happen. And the thing is, I don't understand the computer stuff, but I understand a lot of the old physical stuff. And we're going to get into some other examples of that. Now, right here, when I first started my work with cattle, I noticed that sometimes the cattle would go up to shoot, and sometimes they wouldn't. Well, why wouldn't they go into this veterinary facility? Because a flag was there waving. Sometimes the most obvious is the least obvious. They want to rip up the whole facility rather than simply move the flag. It's so obvious. All right, let's think about some other things. The Japanese nuclear power plant accident. I read everything I could find about that. And I'm going, how could they have done this? How could they have let 4 reactors burn up? Because they live by the sea, and they put the emergency generators that run the really important cooling pump that keeps the plant from blowing up in the basement. So when the seawall was breached, the basement filled up full of water. Guess what happens? Electric power boards, diesels, they do not work underwater, and that's why 4 nuclear power plants melted down. Well, I'm now beginning to find out that the problem is they really didn't see it. I can't design a nuclear power plant, but I can visualize all kinds of physical things that could go wrong, like generators getting flooded. I wouldn't make that mistake. Let's look at another mistake that the visual thinker can discover. Airbags killing babies and children. Okay, so you follow the spec. It's got to hold in an adult man with no seatbelt. Well, then it kills babies. And I wouldn't have made that mistake either. But I'm really beginning to think that there's different kinds of minds, and the problem is they just didn't see it. Okay, in my cattle work, look at how that animal's like locked right onto that sunbeam. Well, that seems so obvious when you look at that picture, but it wasn't obvious. And when I first started working on this, and I talked about these things, and this was back in the early 70s, people thought it was crazy to even think about what a cattle was looking at. So I'd get down the chutes and I'd see, what are the animals seeing? Down in the chutes, look at the shadows. I always get asked, do the cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? That's a question I had to answer very early in my career. And I'm not going to show any slaughter pictures, don't worry. And I found they behaved the same way at the Swift plant as they behaved at, veterinary shootout on a ranch or a feed yard. No, they were afraid of things like it's too dark. There's a reflection on a piece of metal. There's a puddle. They could see people walking by. And if you get rid of these distractions, then they'd walk right up the chute. No, they were afraid of visual things that they saw. Well, let's look at things like which way is the animal pointing its ears. That seems pretty obvious. But sometimes things that are obvious aren't all that obvious. Okay, what exactly is photorealistic visual thinking? It's pictures in your head like movies. This is a picture a young autistic man sent to me to show how he has movies in his head. And those are 16 millimeter movie reels. Those are really, really dated. And one thing I liked in the HBO movie is they showed all my projects accurately. I actually did build that optical illusion room. Well, I wouldn't have gotten interested in things like that if I hadn't had a science teacher expose me to those things. Now let's think about different kinds of thinking. And when I wrote my book, my early book, Thinking in Pictures, I realized my thinking was different when I asked people about church steeples. Think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? I was shocked to find out that most people get this vague, generalized one. I only see specific ones. My concept of what a church steeple is a whole bunch of different pictures of specific ones. How did I figure out that a dog was not a cat? Well, I just sorted them by size. But then when our next door neighbors got a dachshund, I had to figure, why wasn't a dachshund a cat? Well, I looked at her nose, and the nose was a visual feature that every dog had that was different from the cat's. No cat had a dog's nose. So then I could even put the little dachshund in the dog file folder. Well, they kind of just flash up into my mind, that churches do, sort of like, Google for images. And they just come up in my mind as still pictures. You see, nothing is abstract for me. Everything is specific. Would you like a snowstorm? Would you like a rainstorm? Would you like a wedding procession? I can give you that. I can pull that up out of memory and put that in the picture. Now, being this kind of visual thinker helped me in my livestock stuff because I could actually test run equipment. And then I'm thinking about right now, I'm kind of imagining this picture of this poor Japanese guy. He's up on some catwalk, and he's looking down at the drowned generators, and he's going, I don't know what the F word is in Japanese, but he's going, we're in so much trouble right now. It's not funny. Now, you might wonder, why is this curved? Cattle have a natural behavior to go back to where they come from. That's why it's curved. Half the cattle in this country are handled in the equipment I designed. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody they thought was mentally retarded. Because when I got into my 20s, I had a gigantic motivation to prove to people I wasn't stupid. Now, let's say you take some of these kids kind of geeky, they're on the mild end of the autism spectrum, and they've gotten labeled with autism. Oftentimes, parents and teachers don't make them do enough stuff. I'm seeing kids that are smart, graduate from college, and they don't know how to order food at a restaurant. They don't know how to shop. They don't know how to do laundry. They don't know how to shake hands. They don't know how to say please and thank you. They got to be taught these basic skills because you don't pick up the social things naturally. You got to be taught. Now, in the 50s, all kids were taught, really rigidly taught social rules. So there's a lot of older people with Asperger's coming out of the woodwork now because their son or their granddaughter or their grandson was diagnosed with Asperger's. And now granddad or dad realizes he has it. I had a NASA space scientist come up to me, it was about 6 weeks ago, and he had a grandson that was diagnosed with autism, and he said, you know what, I've got it too, and half the people at NASA had it. So I'm getting concerned that some of our smartest people aren't going down the right track because it takes a totally different kind of education to train the smart person on the spectrum compared to somebody that's got very severe handicaps and they're not going to be working at Google. You see, it's a very, very big spectrum. It's a continuous trait. There's the dip vat they did for the movie, which I originally designed for John Wayne's feed yard, the John Wayne, the cowboy. And there's one of my drawings. When you're a weird nerd, only way I could sell myself was showing off my work. And I remember going to an ag engineering meeting, and nobody wanted to talk to me because I was this like crazy, geeky, weird lady. And I pulled out one of these drawings, and I go, oh, you did that? Oh, you did that? You know, then I started to get some respect. And that's how I sold projects, by showing my work. And this is another one of my drawings. And they actually put these drawings in the movie, and that really turned me on. Now, I teach a class where I have students actually lay out cattle facilities, where they have to do an exercise in visual thinking. And one of the things you got to learn is how to relate the line on a drawing to the actual thing. The line on a drawing, and then you've got the thing. And that's something that took me a while to learn that. I took the great big drawings of the whole entire Swift plant, and I walked around in that plant for 2 days until every line on that drawing I could relate to a real thing. Like this little tiny square is a concrete column. This big round thing, that's the water tower. This big oval thing is a big vat they salt cure the hides in. You know, where everything, I could, because a drawing was kind of abstract, and I had to relate that to things that are real. So I do the same thing with my students. But then I've noticed a really weird thing happened. I watched the industry, and I've done work for every major meat company. My equipment's in every one of the major meat companies. And watched the industry go from hand drawing, going in the mid-90s, switching over to computers. And some weird things started to happen. I started getting extremely weird mistakes on drawings. They did not know where the center of a circle was. They would have 25-foot long gates. I mean, there's no way that's going to work. The gates would swing wrong because they never actually used the compass. So I started tracking down these drawings. And in every single case, they came from a young kid, never built anything with his hands, never had done any drawing by hand. I had these drawings from every single major meat company. Every single time they came out of some young kid. And the problem is, to see things right, you got to touch. There's a very interesting chapter that Oliver Sacks wrote about a man who got cataracts taken off as an adult. And he'd look at his dog and he didn't know what it was until he felt it. He had to feel it in order to understand the image. Now, I've talked to a number of the animation companies, and I went out to Pixar, I've been out to Disney Imagineering, very, very interesting places. Boy, let me tell you, fun office at Pixar. I mean, they were buying tool sheds at Home Depot and making them into offices. Really cool stuff there. But the other thing that was interesting is this whole business that you have to touch in order to draw. Like Buzz Lightyear starts out as pencil sketches on the wall, and then they also have 3D printer. So they can draw a 3D drawing, and they can print out a little statue of the character. And I noticed something really interesting about those little statues. Where do you think they had the statues located? They were right there next to their computers. So they could hold them and touch them, get that touch feedback, so they wouldn't start making weird mistakes on drawings. What does a baby do? It touches everything. That's how it learns how to see. You know, now in the future, we can get things to where you get the real touch feedback, then maybe you don't have to, be doing with the real things. But I get concerned here as I walk through here. Everything's getting far away from the real things. Okay, we're going to connect the computer up to a power plant. Give me an old 50s style governor hooked up to the main disconnect switch, because that baby spins too fast. I want it shut down. And I want it with something where there's no way to hack it, because it ain't going to have a computer in it. Just going to be that simple. I think there's some very important life-critical things and very expensive things that would break things that maybe the computer should have nothing to do with it. You know, it can have to do with a lot of other things, but not that stuff. Okay, when I was a little kid, I was good at drawing. This is a drawing that a 9-year-old did in perspective. I'm a big fan of building up the kid's area of strength, because on the autism spectrum, also with ADHD and dyslexia, you get a lot of crossover between these different labels. Don't get hung up on your labels as to whether your kid's PDD, autism, maybe social communication disorder. That's a new thing they're going to put in the DMS-5. Build up strengths. You've got uneven skills. Build up the area of strength. Can't emphasize that enough. Also, diagnosis is not precise. It's a behavioral profile. It's not precise like a diagnosis of tuberculosis is precise. You got doctors sitting around in conference rooms, fighting each other on what the DMS-5, the next diagnostic guideline, should have. Nobody sits around a conference room and tries to remake the diagnosis for meningitis or some disease like that. It's precise. Now, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet trunk line that went deep into my visual cortex. Yes, I do. Big, huge graphics card there. Well, when I got these scans, it was like, wow. This would explain object realistic visual thinking that I have. Because to think about anything, I got to have a real picture in my mind. If somebody says to me, okay, well, think about the yummy food I just ate over there in the cafeteria, I see it, and it's good. I'm like, oh, wow, gourmet, this and that. This is really good. Now, another kind of mind is your minds, the mathematics mind, the pattern thinking mind, the engineering mind that does very well on things like the traditional visual spatial type of tests where you have to rotate patterns in space. I'm not good at that. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No taping, no cutting. What you see in the background is a folding pattern. That's certainly not my mind. That's for sure. Now, this is an important slide. These are the kind of different kinds of minds. Now, so-called normal people tend to be more even in the skills, but you get people labeled with various labels, you tend to have uneven skills. And you can have the extreme photorealistic visual thinker like me, can't do algebra, can't do foreign language, just impossible. Then you get the pattern thinker. This is the music and math mind, the engineering mind. Oftentimes loves foreign languages because they can pick up the patterns in the languages. I can't do that. And a common thing you can have happen is you can have a little fourth grader that's brilliant in math and may need to be advanced ahead in math, but he's going to need special ed in reading and in writing composition. You don't want to make that kid just do baby math. Then you need to have some students from the 7th grade come down and teach the kid how to do the more advanced kinds of math. Then you have verbal thinkers. I think our society right now is getting taken over too much with verbal thinking. One of the big problems I think we have now with a lot of policymakers is everything's getting abstract. You've got students graduating in political science. They go to Washington, D.C. They've never worked with anything practical on the ground. Well, they don't think about, well, if I do this policy, how is it going to affect something on the ground out there in the real world? Well, just to show that there are different ways to do mathematics. And there's some people that say that algebra is a prerequisite for geometry. And I go, well, I think that's just rubbish because geometry was invented first. So how could it be the prerequisite for algebra? See, in education, there's an awful lot of big top-down thinking that, they get on these fads. Well, actually, what works the best is having a variety of schools. So that different thinkers can get into educational programs that are going to work for them. And we need to be having a lot more emphasis on what's the kid going to do when he grows up? There's a shortage of things like diesel mechanics, machinists, some of the very high-skilled physical trades. There's a real shortage. We need these people. Well, you certainly need to make the power supplies for your data center. There's some heavy-duty hardware there. You're not going to sit and make it on a computer, that's for sure. Okay, this picture shows how the autistic mind is sorting pictures into categories. You see, to understand a concept, I have to put specific examples into boxes in my mind. A dog will do that, for example. When I'm on the leash, I protect my owner. When I'm off the leash, I can go play. You see, that's a different picture. See, think about it that way. It's different. A horse will do that. Man on the horse, man on the ground. The horse views that as two totally different things. If he was treated badly by a rider, he may have bucked you off when you try to ride him, but he'd be really good about doing shoeing and veterinary work because somebody on the ground never did anything bad to him. Now, I find that when people are doing troubleshooting, when they're trying to figure out what's wrong with a piece of equipment, people have a hard time differentiating between, is it a people training issue or is it a equipment design problem? And is it a big equipment design problem or is it just a glitch? Like stuck trolleys in a meatpacking plant, that'd be just a glitch. Just to sort of categorize these things out. I find a lot of people have a hard time doing this. It's very, very easy for me. All right. let's look at something like British Petroleum. Well, they had lots of safety rules. You go visit one of their rigs, you better have a lid on your coffee cup. You don't have a lid on your coffee cup and you spill coffee, you might fall on the stairs and you might hurt yourself. But they forgot about the stuff that's really important. How about process safety? They were doing all kinds of bad stuff. Rushing, cutting corners, not doing things right. Yeah, sloppy, 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 sloppy. They forgot about the real important stuff. Now, the thing is, both animals and people with autism are bottom-up thinkers. All the different kind of autistic minds tend to be a bottom-up thinker. Now, the thing about bottom-up thinking is to be really good, you got to fill up the database with lots of information. Like I read and I read and I read and I read. So when I go out and I do troubleshooting, I go, oh, well, this problem in this plant, that was sort of like the Jones plant over there, and we did such and such, we added a light to the entrance of the restrainer, and they went right in. So you got to fill up the database. I say to parents, get these kids out, show them all kinds of stuff because they got a really good Google installed in their head, but you got to fill it up with web pages. You got to put web pages in there. Bottom-up thinking forms concepts by categorizing specific examples. It's a very important concept, educating these kids. Top-down thinkers get the concept first. And some of them are getting so far away from the real world that the practical things that they just don't sort of get it. Bottom-up thinking makes it easier to put information into different categories. Actually, there's neuroscience research that shows that the brain makes categories. But these mechanisms oftentimes are kind of covered up with a more top-down thinking. We need to be working on how the different minds can work together. You know, one of the things we need on some of these safety things is a visual thinker to design a safety system at the nuclear power plant. How could you put those generators in the basement? Yeah, you had a backup and a backup. Yeah, but they were all in the basement, so they all drowned. There was no backup for the seawall. And the thing that's really bad is up on the hill next to the plant, there was a granite slab put in the ground. And it was put there 100 years ago, and it said, don't forget. Tsunamis come up to here. And the people in the town knew about that. Not good. So we need different kinds of thinkers to work together. I mean, let's go back to Steve Jobs. He wasn't a programmer. He was an artist. He was all about the user interface. Engineers have to make the inside work. You see, this is where the different minds work together. One of the things I loved about Google when it first came out was I didn't have to learn anything. It was so simple. You know, us technophobes like me could learn how to use it. That's what I like. Different kinds of minds work together, we can do really great things. And I'm getting very concerned that too many smart students are going nowhere. So one geek gets to go to heaven. He gets to come here. Another geek, especially out in the Midwest, is going nowhere. Some of them get so depressed they commit suicide. It's just terrible. Others, they just are playing video games and are on Social Security. See, because the problem that we have in the schools is that this label, whether it's autism or Asperger's syndrome, goes all the way from Steve Jobs down to, or Einstein, down to somebody that's definitely not going to be working here. It's such a big spectrum, and there's like two big kind of pieces of it. And it takes one kind of education on the higher end, another kind of services on the lower end, and a lot of the special educators are much better at working with the more severe kids. But I'm seeing smart kids getting into a bunch of classes with the lower functioning kids, and they're going absolutely nowhere. You get into a school where they've taken out all the hands-on classes, they've taken out science labs, and they've taken out art, and they've taken out music, and they've taken out wood shop and auto shop and all those kinds of things. Those are the classes that get a lot of those, keep those kids going. That's what kept me going. If I hadn't had art, I would have gone absolutely nowhere. Another thing is, we don't have enough science teachers. And I'm very, very concerned about how the public's getting further away from science. I went into a bookstore in the Seattle airport, and I was shocked to find out there was no science section. They had a very big section on history and biography, but not on science. Now, that wasn't the case 10 years ago. I think this is very, very worrying. And I know that a lot of the companies here, Boeing and Google, have reached out to the schools here. We need to be thinking about ways to get much more out there. I think what you're doing with SketchUp's really great. In fact, I have a slide where I show SketchUp, and I talk about things like Wolfram Mathematica, mathematics site and things like that. But my science teacher saved me because he got me interested in studying, because now I had a goal, because I wanted to be a scientist. And I'm concerned that our educational system's failing to stimulate some of these different minds, the visual thinker, the pattern thinker. And there are some educators, and even 10 years ago or so, they're worried that we're overlooking a lot of the visual spatial thinking. Is there sort of a politically correct thing now that everybody's mind's the same? Well, you get in the middle of middle of sort of humanity, that's more so. But I don't agree with Malcolm Gladwell when he says that, it's practice and access to services. Innate ability does matter. I had access to the exact same computer terminal that Bill Gates had access to in 1968, the IBM teletype. And I wanted to learn how to program that. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I had free instruction. I had free access to the machine. That just wasn't my kind of mind. I think it's a shame schools have taken out so many hands-on classes. I think it's just terrible. These are the things that saved me. Because when I did the specialized activities, these were refuges away from teasing. Steve Jobs was tortured by teasing, and he ended up having to go to another school, and that saved him. And these kids get so depressed and so out of it because they're just teased. I talked to a lady that was my age that worked for one of the big government science labs, and she says, when I'm in with the engineers, that's like being in with the grown-ups. When I got stuck over in human resources, that was like being in with the children. All they did was squabble and things like that. I'm very concerned that there's a lot of quirky students, gifted students, going nowhere because they don't have a science teacher to help channel them. And I think that we need these kids to figure out the energy crisis. Because what do they do with these kids in China and India? They become engineers and computer scientists. And I talked to a mom from India. She came up to me at a meeting maybe 7 or 8 years ago. She goes, Asperger kids, naughty, smart. Send them off to computer school, engineering school. But if they don't get exposed to these things, they're not going to get interested in it. And I'm getting very concerned about all the video game addictions. If these things were turning into programming games, fine. Turning into paid employment, fine. But most of the time, it's not. There are some exceptions where they do go into the video game field and get, gainful employment. I think big corporations need to invest in the future. I mean, our university system is just funding, cut. That's eating our seed corn. That's eating our country's seed corn. I'm very worried about that. Now, I just want to talk about a few things in the workplace where you might have somebody that's got a little autism, maybe a little Asperger's, or maybe when they change the guidelines, social communication disorder, and they're making this new guideline probably so they can get out of having to pay for funding. They're doing it for that reason. See, the thing is, you disconnect a few social circuits, then you get more circuits for art or for math and that kind of fun stuff. But you can also get, in a lot of things, ADHD, dyslexia, sensory issues. Can't stand loud noise. Can't stand fluorescent lights because I can see them flicker. The whole office is flickering on and off like a discotheque. I've gone into a lot of computer offices. Didn't see that so much here, but boy, you go to the animation companies, oh, they're in a dark hole there because I got all the fluorescent lights off because they can't stand the flicker. Loud sounds hurting the ears. Well, there's a number of people in a quiet place to work. Another problem is attention shifting slowness. They don't multitask well. Now, most of the jobs here don't require you to multitask. You can just sit there and you do your job. But attention shifting problems. And some people, when they go to read, they can see the print jiggle on the page because there's a problem back here in the visual cortex with the circuits that merge shape, color, motion, and texture and assemble that graphics file. Something's wrong with that because it didn't grow right. Print jiggles. Let me tell you some simple ways to fix that. Because I'm finding 1 out of 50 in my design class, and these kids cannot draw. If I ask them to just draw that, they can't do it. And I said, print jiggle on the page? Do fluorescent lights flicker? Do you hate driving at night? Do you hate escalators? Well, why don't you try changing the background color of the computer? Maybe light blue, light lavender. Try printing your stuff on, some light gray paper or tan paper. That sometimes helps. And sometimes colored lenses help. Pale lavender, pale pink, but you got to pick out the color that works for you. Nobody knows why that works, but it's such a simple thing. You'd be kind of stupid not to try that. And then there are some of my books. And one of the books I've got there is Developing Talents, and it's about, jobs for people on the spectrum. Jobs for visual thinkers, jobs for the engineering kinds of minds, and jobs for word thinkers. Because I'm getting really concerned that there's an awful lot of talent that's sort of going to waste. Because there's all kinds of old Aspies now, and they're coming out of the woodwork. And the reason why they got diagnosed at the age of 50 was because they had social problems with their marriages. But they managed to get good jobs, a lot of them in technical fields, a lot of them not in technical fields. Not everybody on the spectrum is a technical person. Maybe half of them are technical people. Then you've got a bunch that are artists. I think we're going to end with that, and we've got about 20 minutes to just do some really, really interesting questions and discussion, because that's what I really like to do. Okay? Okay, we've got a mic here, so we got to use the mic so that the...
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully that's working. And if nobody has a question, they want to pick somebody. So okay, how about right here?
Is this working? Okay. There's actually a comment. There was an interesting point that you made about these computer-generated designs coming from young people that wouldn't actually work, and gates that wouldn't close, and things like
All
that.
that stuff doesn't. And the thing is, these mistakes, the old timers didn't make these mistakes.
Well,
Not
exactly.
these kinds of mistakes.
No, the reason I mentioned is because I was talking to a woman who works for the California Department of Transportation about maybe 10, 15 years ago. And she said that even back then, she was seeing designs of highways, of roads, that would literally be dangerous for people to drive
downtown
on.
Denver, man, you get in the right-hand lane, you're just forced off.
Well, in one case, she was saying the way they would do the crowns and the angles of the slopes as they would design the curve around some obstacle. Said there's no car on the road today that will stay on that road but they had no concrete. The computer said it was right, so it had to be right.
But that doesn't mean it's going to be right. I had a drawing sent to me that was a ramp for a meat plant. And for cattle, you want to go a 3.5-inch step and an 18-inch run. And so, now that going, they didn't want to form as much concrete, so they went with a 6-inch riser. And I was afraid the cattle would trip, and I said, put it back to a 3.5 by 18-inch step. So they did that, and I get the drawings back. And the steps went like this, and then just straight. They forgot that when you go with less rise, you have to have more steps. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. Major meat company, major name, I'm not going to say it, that you see in a grocery store. I'm going, you got to be kidding. It's happening, and every single time I trace these drawings, I say, I'll call them up. And I just, I get the kid on the phone, and I talk to him, and I go, did you ever build anything? Did you ever hand draft first? No. I mean, I do this discreetly, but every single time, this is what I have found.
The other thing is that since I did some work in early childhood education and developmental psychology, one of the things, and in anthropology, one of the things that seems to me really clear that corroborates with what you've been saying is that we've evolved over tens of millions of years for the brain to understand how the world works as little children and as infants through that physical touch and interaction. And without that, there is this disconnect.
Well, and I think kids, I just saw something in the paper the other day about, giving kids blocks and having them build things out of blocks. I think that's actually a good thing, because in order to see, and the brain is work, you got to touch to really understand. And I think that's interesting. And you're talking with animation companies, they handle their little figurines that 3D printer puts out. They don't put them up on some high up shelf there. They were all clustered right around the keyboard, right next to the monitor. They're holding them. And what do you do? Okay.
I had a question about animal dissections in schools.
Okay.
Because you're talking about hands-on learning and stimulating those visual thinkers. That you get a lot of pushback from parents who are like, oh, I don't want my kids, cutting open an animal and kids that are like, no, I don't like that. That's wrong. That's wrong to cut open a pig for this, that kind of thing. And teachers that are, kind of sharing that same idea. And I know that you're in a field where, it's livestock handling, is that we raise animals and then we, for use. And not that there are things, but, that we have to respect these animals. The question is, my biology teacher, she was the only one who continued doing dissections in school. Everyone else looked at her and she was kind of shunned because she thought it was so important.
And how did you feel about it, doing it?
I thought it was incredibly useful. It wasn't the same as, computer images that show you how to do these dissections.
And let's look at another thing. One of the most, attractions that most people go to, like in the city of Denver, the more people go to the zoo than go to the stadiums. Video isn't the same thing. They want to see a real lion, a real tiger. They want to see the real thing. And I think we can get so far removed from the real world that it could be very bad. Because when I look at some of the stuff going on in Washington, I go down to Washington, D.C., it's like going to the Twilight Zone. Everything has just turned into posturing, who's going to win. I'm a child of the 50s. Man, we built the interstate highway system. In the 60s, my generation, we went to the moon. Man, we did stuff. No problem. I mean, we got people in this side, here they're still doing stuff, but I get kind of worried here as I walk through here that you might forget, especially in something like a power plant, what the computer's connected to. Because I understand that big gate valve that won't turn. You don't put diesel generators where they're going to get wet. That kind of stuff I understand. And you don't want to get so far away from that you forget about that stuff. You may need some people like me that get some people out of heavy industry that worked in maintenance department at heavy industry, and they'll go, oh man, you do that, and that computer goes crazy, that's going to destroy the turbine.
I think that many people that work in software industry, where indeed we work with the computer in some kind of a virtual world, they have side hobbies where they actually work with real things.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that's good that you're doing that.
For instance, I like motorcycles. And
Good.
I fix my motorcycles.
Okay,
and I
good.
like to-
I'm glad that you're doing things with
and
motorcycles.
Many other people do gardening and all kinds
That's
of stuff.
good. I think that's really good. I think that's good because it kind of, I think some of the local food movement is an urge to get back and connect with, the nature and the real world. There's an urge to get back to those things.
My point is that people get some balance in their life.
Good.
In this virtual versus the real.
Well, and I think that's really good that, because working on your motorcycle, that's a mechanical device. But I'm getting worried today when oh man, politicians, they just fight. They've forgotten about doing things. How do we solve problems? When I was a child, man, we did stuff. There's also some research that's so big and expensive, only the government can do it. GPS? Oh, the Defense Department put up those satellites. The Internet, that was DARPA. Advanced brain scanning, that's DARPA. I got scanned on that scanner. That was the scan that was shown on 60 Minutes. That's not at your hospital yet. The Boeing jet originally was a military tanker. There's some very, very big research. I get worried about some of the funding cutbacks. There's things, you guys are doing really great things, but when you get into things that are totally new, it's like what private company would have developed GPS satellites? Private companies can develop a little gadget that picks up the signal, and when the military degraded the signals, private industry figured out how to read degraded signals and make them real accurate. But private industry would have never spent the kind of money to put that up there. This country's got to get back to doing stuff. I look at, we cancel our shuttle program. The Chinese are starting theirs, and that's turning on all the little kids over in China, just like we were turned on back in the, back in the 60s. I worshiped the astronauts when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that we probably won't be back on the moon in our lifetimes. But anyway, why do people react differently, especially at an emotional level, to animals?
What do you mean react differently?
So some people, as they grow up, become more emotionally dependent on animals, and some never want to be around animals or fear them.
Well, in the autism group, there's some kids on the spectrum where they just totally best buddies with the dog. They really understand the dog. And there's others that don't like them because they have a sensory problem, like the dog might bark and hurt their ears, or the cat might meow and that hurts their ears. And so it's really variable. But I kind of don't, some people really like animals. I find lots of times that people that are highly verbal, they don't get animals. Because I've seen a lot of very, very good animal trainers. They're a bit dyslexic or ADHD. But I had a student who was fabulous with animals. She was an extreme auditory thinker. She had very, very bad problems with the visual processing problem that I just talked about. And she'd listen to the animal, like how it breathed. It was tremendous auditory detail. Okay, the mic over there.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm hearing, at least you saying, is that we need to get our children outside and get the children outside experiencing, playing on a playground or being out in nature.
The lawyers are trying to stop all that.
Because, I mean, when I started, it was called programming, not system engineering. But I was, again, one of those people that everything I did, I knew it was going to have a bug in it. But if I went out and planted vegetables, I knew they were going to grow and what they were going to be. Yeah, it was sort of that same sort of thing.
Well, there's a wonderful book called Last Child in the Woods by, I think it's Richard Louv. And we've got, people are getting totally removed from the natural world. Just want to mention before I forget, there's an autism meeting where I'm going to be strictly talking about autism. I'll be discussing a lot of medication issues. Way too many kids given way too many medications. It's over in Bellevue at the Maidenhauer Convention Center, and I'll be there at 8:30 tomorrow.
And I mean, one other comment. We have a son who's dyslexic, who's turned out to be an engineer. But when he went through high school, you had to constantly be at their teachers because he was always on a knife's edge. Was he going to do really well or was he going to fail? And it wasn't, and it was so much dependent on how the teacher perceived his problem.
Well, mentors. You see, this is where I know there's several kids, I've talked to quite a few situations where you had a parent or grandparent or maybe a next door neighbor get the kid interested in something like programming. Even teach him something really old-fashioned, like DOS, because that's the only thing that Mama knew. But what that did is it got the spark turned on. Because I'm finding with most kids, there's some that go find the books and do it all themselves, but most of them, there's got to be some instruction. Otherwise, they're going to just play video games. They start saying, okay, let me show you how you can make a game. Someone's going to just start showing them some things.
This son wanted to write graphics programs when he was 3 and 4 years
old.
All
right, well, then someone needs to show him how to write graphics programs. Okay.
I hope you'll forgive me asking a personal question. I think probably many of the people, if not most of the people in this room, first learned about you from Oliver Sacks.
Yes, that's right.
And subsequently, we've heard you on the radio and on television. And I have to say, you seem much more socially adept than the way Oliver Sacks described you.
Yeah, but that was quite a long time ago. That was over 15 years ago. The thing is, the person on the spectrum keeps learning. You keep learning. Like Claire Danes did a really good job of being me in the 60s and the 70s. Oh, and the movie is available on Amazon's got it, keyword Temple Grandin. But you keep learning. You see, an autistic person keeps learning. You have to learn how to be in the play. I also take antidepressant medication, which got rid of horrendous anxiety attacks and panic attacks I used to have. I take a very low dose, and I've got information on medication and thinking in pictures in my other book over there, The Way I See It, which I think they're going to run out of. It's available over at Bellevue, and it's available in bookstores. Okay, we're going to pick somebody because we still got some time left here. All right, okay.
We got a few more too, okay.
I just wanted to say there are people out there that are working with this younger population.
Good.
I'm not a techie person. I'm his partner, and I have a degree in counseling psychology, but I work from a little bit different slant, and it's because I have some ADD and I have other things going on with me. I'm a technical kind of person, mechanical technical kind of person. So in my age group, I didn't fit into those programs because I was a female.
Well, I
And so-
thought that. I was a lady going into man's business, and I really did put bull testicles all over my vehicle. That actually happened.
But I went into this field because I have a son who has got dyslexia and ADD, and I wanted to help these kids. So I'm developing a nature therapy program, or I have developed it, so that these kids get a chance to get out and experience nature and experience the physical part of that world we're talking about.
No, and I think
So-
that's really important. Let's see, there was a question right over there.
Oh, well, first I had a comment. My mother very much enjoyed your movie, and she felt it really helped her understand my daughter, who's on the spectrum. So that was very nice. She's like, oh, I understand the sound thing bothering her now. What I wanted to say, though, is we both came from agricultural and construction backgrounds, so we had kind of a real-world start, but now he does computers, and we're struggling on getting our own kids as much of the outdoor and the physical.
Well, the real world thing, we were coming in this morning, you didn't know what a concrete pump was. You know, that's, we see construction stuff. I don't know anything about your computer stuff, but I worked for years on with construction stuff. So I go by a construction site, I'm all looking at the stuff.
Well, so far we haven't found much better than sending them up to their grandparents to play with the
The
excavator.
other thing I think we need to be doing is when kids get into middle school, they got to learn work skills. They got to learn how to do assigned tasks. Like when I was a young kid, all I would do is do horse head pictures over and over again, and I had to be encouraged to maybe do the whole horse, draw a picture of something else. You've got to broaden out the skills. Another bad thing today, even for normal kids, is kids are not doing play groups. 3 or 4 kids get together, make up their own game. You've got to negotiate. You've got to teach these kids turn taking. They're not learning those things. I think kids, when they're 13 or 14, they need to do some jobs. You know, because we're coming out with another book, Different Not Less, about old Aspies 50 and up that made it. They got a diagnosis because their marital relationships were bad, but they managed to hold jobs for their whole life. Every single one of them had middle school and high school jobs. You know, we're not teaching job skills. I think it's just terrible. They can't get a paper route. They can walk dogs for somebody because that's something they're going to have to do it every day. Because I had to learn how to use my art skills to make cattle handling facilities that people wanted. Okay, there was a question right back there.
Thanks for all your influence, too. My question is, if autism and all those spectrum disorders are genetically linked, do you think there's something environmentally or culturally, nutritionally affecting the numbers, as well as people being aware of what they went through?
Well, I think on milder Asperger end, I think a lot of it's just increased detection. And I think the other thing is in the 50s, they pounded those social rules in, and so they coped better. I think there is some severe autism that's increased, especially this regressive autism, where the child loses language at around 18 months to age 2, you know, maybe plasticizers. There's a strong genetic basis. It's a complicated genetics. It's little tiny code variations within genes, a whole lot of little code variations. It's not simple genetics like Downs or whether you have blue eyes or blonde hair. It's not that simple kind of genetics.
Do you think pesticides or other plastics are
Well, I think
contributing?
the thing to be the biggest thing is plasticizers, endocrine disruptors, like those plastic water bottles. I don't think it's the greatest idea for, you know, if you're pregnant to drink out of those or have your kid nurse out of them. You know, I'm usually not alarmist about that sort of stuff, but that's one thing that I'm a lot more worried about that than pesticides, just in some of the stuff I've read. I drink out of them. I'm 64 years old. I don't have to worry about it. I'll drink out of them. They've been in the car for 2 weeks and they taste like plastic, and I'm just not worried about it.
Hello. I was wondering what your thoughts are. And I guess I kind of consider myself on Asperger's spectrum. It's kind of the whole, but you know, I spent my whole life and I'm highly functioning. Obviously, I graduated from MIT. I'm an
And what do you
engineer
do?
at
What kind of, you do programming?
I'm a software engineer here.
Okay.
So, you know, surprise, surprise. But, you know, the whole question, you know, maybe about 6 or 7 years of my life ago, I heard about the term Asperger's, read about it a bunch, said, okay, sure, that's me. But then there's a question of how much do I share that with other people? I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on this because I'm well in the range where I can just, I've done my entire life.
I even now, if I meet somebody on a plane, I don't disclose.
Yeah.
I think there's still discrimination out there. I get worried about some of these smart kids getting held back by labels. If somebody, I have dads come up to me and they'll say, well, should I get a formal diagnosis? I just go, read the books. Keep it off those electronic medical records. I don't really want some Google app getting into that. Really don't.
That's the same thought I had.
I would certainly recommend reading some of the books. The stuff I found the most helpful was the personal reports from people and some of the brain research stuff. But it'll wreck your insurance. It wrecked my health insurance.
Really?
I was turned down by AARP, American Association of Retired People, for a broken nose. You know that's BS. And that was just used as an excuse. And it's, but the thing is, in the tech industry, you got a lot of Asperger genetics, because if you totally got rid of all those genetics, you're not going to have any mathematicians. I mean, you have a lot of social yakety yaks that aren't going to get very much done. Because the thing is, if you don't have people in the world interested in things, the social people are more interested in just chit-chatting and socializing, which I'm not. And one of my big concerns today is I'm seeing too many smart kids just going nowhere. They're getting addicted to drugs. They're getting addicted to video games. They haven't been taught any job skills. It's going nowhere. You see, the problem is it is such a big spectrum. And the kind of teaching and stuff that a mild person needs is very different than the more severe ones. But it's all got the same name. And when they come out with the new DMS-5, they're going to take the Asperger's out and just call everything autism spectrum. Well, that really makes it clear as mud. Scientifically, that's correct, because it's a true continuous trait. But I'm seeing people get locked into the labels. My kid, PDD, pervasive developmental disorder, or autism. You know what? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that was about my experience, that it wasn't worth getting any type of formal diagnosis. And people are saying, why don't you, you call, a girlfriend.
I would read some books.
I'm basically, my gist was, why do I, as near as I can tell, there's no advantage to me getting any formal diagnosis.
No,
by
it's a disadvantage. It can really wreck your insurance. And what I tell most people your age that are employed in a good job like this, keep it off those electronic medical records. But I would read, a bunch of the books, maybe even go to some of the meetings. Now, why with a little kid would you get diagnosed? To get services. You see, if you want to get services for a really young child, you've got to have the diagnosis.